Just checking that's working. There we go. This is the Edgware and Hendon Reformed Synagogue live stream, and we, as well as yourselves on the live stream, there are many people who are here on Zoom, and we're bringing them all in, and we will start our lecture in about 2 minutes' time or so. And I just saw Sarah Lee coming in, so lots of Lees are coming to join us, which is really super.
How are we doing?
And again, as I could ask you, please, to make sure your microphone is muted at this stage. And I can hear on the live stream that that's working. And already many people are joining us on the live stream as well. So, Tony, if you thought that, just to give you an idea, you're talking to a room full of probably 100 and something people so far, which will continue to grow, I suspect, or may shrink during your talk, depending on how much we enjoy it. But I'm sure it will only grow. So we're going to begin in a couple of minutes from now. I'm just going to check in one more place to make sure the live stream is working in every way you might be able to pick it up. And to check the sound is right. Or may shrink during your talk, depending on how much we enjoy, but I'm sure it will only grow. There we are. 1 minute to go, and then we will begin the Rabbi Michael Leigh Zichrono Livracha Memorial Lecture for this year for Edgware and Hendon Reformed Synagogue in a format that we have never quite done before. So I'm now going to turn on the recording. We will be recording this, which will also mean that if there's anybody else who'd like to hear it later on, they will be able to. So I'm going to start the recording just now. It's a complete pleasure for me to welcome you to the Rabbi Michael Leigh Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be for a blessing, Memorial Lecture on this, which is the 20th anniversary of Rabbi Leigh's yahrzeit. It's lovely that we're joined by members of his family, and we are, of course, joined by our lecturer for tonight, Rabbi Professor Tony Bayfield. He went up from a doctor a little while ago, and looking forward very much to hearing him. Just to give you an idea of what's going to happen, we are going to begin with in a moment from now with the ritual which starts a B'nai B'rith meeting. Of course, we are co-hosted, as always, by the Yitzhak Rabin B'nai B'rith Lodge, of which Rabbi Leigh was a member and an active member, I believe. And we'll go over to Tony Everton and to Wendy Fireman in a few moments from now to do that. Then we will have our talk that we'll enjoy, I'm quite sure, from Rabbi Professor Tony Bayfield. And then there will be questions afterwards. So if you're thinking about anything, do feel welcome to jot down a question you might have for Tony so that you can enjoy it. And we will have the chance to do that probably from about 8:30 or so. And then at 5 to 9, as we come to an end, a vote of thanks is going to be proposed by Keith Price, together also with some memories of Michael Leigh and his significance for our synagogue, Edgware and Hendon Reformed Synagogue now, but in his time, Edgware and District Reformed Synagogue. So I'm now going to turn us over to Tony and Wendy. Just to let you know, Tony Bayfield, we have 50 participants on Zoom, or 50 screens, and just over 30 on our live stream. So you have a room of about 150 people that you're probably talking to. So enjoy, and I know we're all going to very much enjoy learning from you tonight. So let me now bring Tony Everton and Wendy Fireman forward for the ritual that begins every B'nai B'rith meeting. Let me unmute you, please. Where are you? That's it. I think you just need to unmute yourself if you could. There we are. And please begin. We can hear you now, Wendy.
Hello, everybody. This is the candlelighting ceremony that precedes every B'nai B'rith Lodge meeting in 50 countries throughout the world. It reminds us of our objectives to support our fellow Jews regardless of their religious direction and to support those in need wherever they are. The first candle stands for light. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This was the first act of creation and the first divine command. The second candle stands for justice. Justice, justice, shalt thou pursue. Justice, our sages teach us, is one of the pillars which uphold the world. It orders the affairs of man. The third candle stands for peace. Wise men promote peace throughout the world. Peace within our homes and within the house of Israel. Peace among men and peace among nations. The fourth candle stands for benevolence. Happy is he who considers the poor. Each of us should assist his fellow men, not only with material things, but with advice, sympathy, and comfort. The fifth candle is for brotherly and sisterly love, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. In the exercise of this commandment, we realize both the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. The sixth candle represents harmony. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to sit together in unity. As we are in harmony within the lodge, we let us create harmony within the community at large. The seventh candle stands for truth, the seal of the Holy One. Blessed be he, is truth. Truth does not mean merely adherence to facts. It signifies fidelity, loyalty, and integrity.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Rabbi Professor Tony Bayfield. And I'm going to do that with a few pictures, which he's not actually aware is about to happen, but here we go. Where is he? There we are.
What's going on now?
Let's begin. Tony is Rabbi Professor Tony Bayfield, CBE. His semicha came from Liabeck College, and this lovely picture here shows him at the ordination of Rabbi Kath Vardy, which is very relevant. This is the ordination from Liabeck College of Tony, of Kath, and Tony holding a Sefer Torah, because his first pulpit was Northwest Surrey Synagogue, of which he was rabbi for just over 14 years. Then Tony went on to be the director, a founding director of the Sternberg Center for Judaism, making a center for Reform Judaism which had cultural relevance to the whole of the Jewish world and still retains that role. After that, Tony became chief executive and later head of the Movement for Reform Judaism. That meant that he became our representative for those who are Reform Jews to the whole of the country in many different ways, and indeed part of the wide Jewish movements around the world. And here you can see him at one of the many times when he represented us. Tony may remember what this one was. It's unfortunately not there in the caption. At that point, there was a picture made of Tony, which is in the National Portrait Gallery collection. And this is him in his office. Actually, I think it must be in the Liabeck College room of prayer, I suspect. But Tony was, for so many of us, the face of Reform Judaism. As he told me, that meant getting up at 6 a.m. to go up to Sheffield just as much as it meant going into the Sternberg Center and teaching at Learbeck College, just as much as it meant coming to synagogues such as EDRS as it was then, in order to be with our congregation and with so many congregations around the country and to represent us. All the way alongside this, Tony was always teaching. And it was indeed as a teacher that I first properly met him, as he taught my class homiletics when we were in the first year of Learbeck College. So you can blame Tony for any duff sermons that I might give either now or into the future. But he got me started, and also got me started on my interest in Jewish business ethics, and inspired a whole generation of rabbis. Finally, Tony got the chance to write. Now, he had been writing all the time. He published Sinai Law and Responsible Autonomy, which helped many of us to understand about the development of Reform Judaism and what it meant for the individual in terms of how they work with Jewish law. But he also wrote many books on dialogue, as you can see in some of the pictures here. He is a person who revels in being with people and connecting people together. He wrote Dialogue with a Difference. He wrote He Kissed Him and They Wept with Rabbi Sidney Brichter of blessed memory and Eugene Fisher. He wrote Beyond the Dysfunctional Family, because he's also interested in how does religion affect us as individuals and as people. And he edited Deep Calls to Deep. Now, retired from his role as head of the Movement for Reform Judaism and then president of the Movement for Reform Judaism, he finally had the time to write. We'll hear a bit more about that later. And the subject of his lecture is the name of his book, Being Jewish Today, Confronting the Real Issues. We're going to hear plenty about that today, and if you want to find for yourself a copy, all you need to do is to go to the EHRS website, look at the billing for this lecture, and there you will see there's a link straight to be able to get either a real book or an audio book with Tony narrating it himself and reading the book for you, which you can play through your earphones as you go on your daily allowed exercise over however long it is that we're able to do that exercise. So it's a complete pleasure for me to be able to introduce Rabbi Professor Tony Bayfield. If you have any copies of Manna, by the way, which is the journal of Reform Judaism from 1983 to 2011, know that he was always the editor of it, the person who's helped Reform Jews to know how to think. Now, let's find out how he helps Reform Jews to know how they might start doing theology. So I'm going to close the share. There's a couple more people to let into the lecture who are waiting to hear. And I'm now going to bring Tony forward for him to be ready to begin. Tony, you'll need to, I'm going to unmute you.
You are unmuted. I'm unmuted.
Fantastic.
Mark, that was the nicest introduction, the most generous introduction I think I've ever received. I'm incredibly grateful to you. And you know the picture of me with Lord Sachs that you showed earlier? I don't know who was the lady in red. Now, this is not going to be a lecture in the sense that you're used to lectures. The day of the 50-minute monologue may be drawing to a close. In any event, I don't think it works in this medium. So it's more, the format we've set is like an interview. And Mark is going to interview me. He's going to ask me questions. And I just hope that he'll be a little politer than some of the interviewers are on the BBC. And he'll allow me to go on for it before he interrupts me. But at the same time, if I'm not answering the question, Mark, you're perfectly entitled to say, answer the question. So I'll hand back to you to set the ball rolling.
Thank you, Tony. So my first question is partly goes for why you're here so kindly speaking to this 150 or so of us tonight. The original idea to say, could we ask Tony, came from Sonia Lee. And that was because she had been invited to a book launch of your book, Being Jewish Today, but unfortunately wasn't able to go on that evening. So I think she's thought, well, let's bring the book launch to us. Because she wanted to ask the question, why? How did Being Jewish Today come about? Why now? Why have you done it?
That's as you would expect from dear Sonia, a very wise and penetrating question. I suppose that I've always wanted to write, to make a contribution to core Judaism, to Jewish thought. And there's something of sort of, if I don't do that, I'm not a proper rabbi. So it probably comes out of my neurotic insecurities. But anyway, what I think also prompted it was during my 15 years as the head of the Reform movement, being forever asked by my board to write something that would sum up Reform Judaism in 100 words. Sometimes they were generous and they said you can go to 200. And what they had in mind was that I wrote something so that Mrs. Cohen in Boreham Wood would read it, see the light, and come rushing with many followers to Edgware and Hendon and join the synagogue. And they weren't just concerned about Edgware. They were also concerned that maybe Mr. Levy, living in Dewsbury up north, would rush to Leeds, having seen the light, and do the same thing. And now I couldn't do it. I know that comms, as I believe it's called in government briefings, and PR and marketing are all incredibly important. But the danger with them is that unless what they're marketing, publicizing, communicating leads to something of substance, then what you're left with is Judaism light. That's the slur or criticism that's often thrown at Reform Judaism. And I can see that it has some validity. Judaism light, L-I-T-E, it has a value as an attraction, but unless we have something of substance to offer, we're in big trouble. And that's, I suppose, what was going through my mind when the Reform movement said to me, when I was about to step down, I believe is the current phrase. They said to me, Tony, we'd like you to become president of the Reform movement. And I said, don't think I want to do that. I said, I know what you'll have me doing. You'll have me still standing on the platform to go to Sheffield at 6 o'clock in the morning. And the only difference will be that you won't pay me. No, I've seen that coming. They said, no. You choose what you want to do. You write your own unpaid job specification as president. And what came out top of the list was writing this book that would give some substance to Reform Jewish thought. One of my board members, lovely man called Charles Kessler, unfortunately a member of Finchley, but he's still a lovely man. Charles said, "We want you to give Reform Judaism bottom." And I actually understood what he meant. So the book is an attempt to give Reform Judaism bottom. And I started researching it, which is a posh word for doing quite a lot of reading. And I realized that what I needed to do was to see whether it is possible for liberal religion, liberal Judaism, and I hasten to add, lest I cause anybody to fall off their chairs, liberal with a small l, progressive Reform Judaism, whether it is actually possible to express a system of beliefs in a coherent manner, whether what I've been talking about in sermons over many years, and I did enjoy my brief spell teaching homiletics at the Leobeck College, because I think sermons are incredibly important. If you can, and I think this is what sermons are about, if you can express challenging ideas, difficult ideas, in an accessible way, in a way that relates to a wide range of people who are listening to you. So I wanted to see whether it was possible to do that in a systematic way. In other words, to write what we call in the trade a systematic theology of liberal Judaism. And in the course of doing that, I suddenly realized, well, I was confronted with the fact that I was going to have to talk about God. And I then realized, I wonder whether my tenuous thoughts about God, which had been set aside under the weight of leading services and attending meetings and writing mission statements for the movement and attending meetings, whether what would actually happen to that tenuous hold on God. And I was really scared, because I realized just how much I was exposing myself. Well, many of you will not yet have read the book, though I hope you will do so. Mark has, and he'll be able to tell you that actually it did hold up, albeit in a rather quirky, argumentative way.
Right.
So that's
Tony,
the book.
Tony, you just mentioned the G word, God.
Yes.
And actually that seems to have done us well, because we're now over 95 screens. So there's a lot of people who want to hear this. But there's a problem. You know, we often say Jews don't do theology. This is not a faith. This is a culture. And if we don't do theology, why create, when you've now got the time, a book about theology?
It's a very interesting question. But what's even more interesting is why Jews say that we don't do theology. And we need to examine our own psychology there. You can't say that there isn't God and God talk and theology in the Torah. You know, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out the land of Egypt, etc., etc., etc. The Talmud, which was compiled in the 6th century in Babylon and is that huge compendium of classical rabbinic thought, does contain a lot of legal material, which we call halachic material. But it contains an equal amount, if not more, of ethical and spiritual exploration, and particularly God talk. The rabbis were always talking about God in a very interesting, in a unique kind of way, and with a daring that often leaves you breathless. If we go forward, when I was growing up as a Reformed Jew, we ended every Friday night service by singing Yigdal, or was it Saturday morning? It was one or the other. We always sung Yigdal, and Yigdal is the musical setting of the great Maimonides' 13 Principles of the Jewish Faith, the musical setting of Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shlema, I believe with a perfect faith. So it is just nuts to say that we don't do theology. We've moved into a time when there is a stream of Judaism which denies or belittles the agadic, the moral, the ethical, the theological side of Judaism, and says only halacha, only the halachic is really important. And that as long as you observe, don't worry your head about other things. Na'aseh v'nishma, you'll do, and then you might come to understand and hear the voice of God, but don't worry about that. But that's not typical of Judaism, and actually it isn't very helpful today because the big questions of meaning and purpose and why, particularly as far as I'm concerned, why is this world so painful and unfair and unjust? Why is there so much seemingly meaningless suffering? And where's God in all that is, I think, probably the most important question. And so many people dismiss the question by saying, or dismiss God by saying there is no reasonable answer to that question. And that's one of the reasons why not only Judaism, but all religion is in so much pressure, under so much pressure from the secular world. So I think the question leads to an evasion. And I'm saying, not only am I not prepared to evade, there's something in me which drives me to say, no, Tony, I don't know what's going to come out the other end, but you've got to begin the exploration. But I also think that it's counterproductive as far as the Jewish future is concerned, not to answer the great questions that trouble Jews, Christians, Muslims, humanists, and secularists alike.
you begin, Tony, when you start the book with yourself, personal theology. Because I'm sitting here with my teacher, and so it doesn't seem arrogant for a teacher to start with themselves. But I presume when you started that book, that must have been a tough decision, that you're starting with yourself. Do you need an arrogance to do that? Is it a confidence? Why start theology with you rather than with some great cosmology and something right outside of yourself and just theory?
Well, I don't think it's arrogance. I think it's, let's start a little bit back from the question. The book's in 4 sections, and the first section is about context. Starting point was actually many years ago, my first dialogue group, Christian-Jewish dialogue group. And one of the members of the group was a rabbi called Norman Solomon. Norman's thankfully still with us, living and still teaching in Oxford, even though he's even older than me. Norman, some of you, if you're as mature as I am, remember he was the rabbi of Dennington Park Road, the United Synagogue, the Orthodox Synagogue in West Hampstead. And sitting there with Norman, and Norman came out with this. He said, when Jews and Christians, or any other 2 faith groups, when they engage, there's always a third person in the room, and that third person is modernity. Or post-modernity. It's the big wide world in which all of us, whether we be Jew or Christian, Muslim, humanist or secularist, into which we're all born, we all grow up, we all work, we all live, and we all die. And its presence is inescapable, and to ignore it or deny it is stupid in the extreme, because that's the way the world and the world is that we experience today. And I came to realize that, or by reading, that it all begins back in the 16th century, when the cosmologists, culminating in Galileo, and everybody will have heard of Galileo, said that the Earth moved round the sun. And in came the Catholic Church, led by the Pope, and said, you can't say that. You're contradicting revealed religion. You're contradicting scripture, brackets, the way we interpret scripture, or say you must interpret scripture. And Galileo said, but he does move. And they thundered at him, and he even offered to retract what he'd said, because it was such a shattering experience. But the church chose not to let him. And from that moment, the church said that revealed religion, the big truths, take precedence over reason and science. And ever since, and that wasn't incidentally how Judaism has ever reacted to that particular issue, but the modern world begins there with a unnecessary conflict between religion on the one hand and science and reason on the other, and we're still living in that world. Now, that just connects because what science does and philosophy does, the founding figure of modern philosophy, Descartes, who says cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. We start with us, science and its observations, it put forwards hypotheses, it tests them, it measures, tests, and moves on from there. And we can only start from ourselves. We don't have any other choice. We know we mustn't finish with ourselves, though I'll take that back. It is terrible to finish with yourself and to think that just because you've come to a hypothesis, that's the truth. But you can only start with yourself. And that influenced the book very, very profoundly. There's an ancient, 700 years old, way or tradition for dividing up Jewish thought. It comes from the Zohar, which was written at the very end of the 13th century. And it divides Judaism into God, Torah, and Israel. Israel meaning Israel as people and Israel as land. So it starts with God, Torah, Judaism, and identity. And I've followed that pattern, but I've reversed the order because I think that most people start fundamentally with themselves. And as soon as they start thinking about who they are, the Jewish bit comes up. Who am I? How do I feel about this identity? How am I going to express it? Many don't get much further than that, which is their privilege, though there may be problems then with transmission to their children and their children's children. Many then move on to Judaism, or some move on to Judaism. The content of Jewish identity, the meaning and purpose of being a Jew, and then maybe start really asking some questions about God. But the direction of travel, I think, is more in that direction. It's not starting with the big issues, the 13 principles of the Jewish faith. I believe in the coming of the Messiah, or I believe that Moses was the greatest prophet, and then working back. So it's the way the world has been going for the last 500 years. And it just seemed good to be honest about it and work in that way.
But Tony, if you do that, starting with the individual, starting with Israel and not starting with God, does that mean that you're basically anti-revealed religion? Your book is radical, of no interest to anybody who's from an orthodox frame of mind? really only for those who believe in liberal theology, or perhaps, specifically Reform and liberal Judaism?
I would hope not. How shall I? Let me start here. The book went through many stages, and it was only after that it had its ups and downs, and it was only after the publication of Deep Calls to D, which you referred to about 3 years ago, which was the second item on my job spec as president, that it was so well received. People said such nice things about it that my beloved partner Jackie said to me, "You're going to a mainstream publisher, the best you can think of, with a proposal." And Jackie is a teacher of some seniority, and one doesn't argue with her. So she and through a process of good fortune, I chose to go to Bloomsbury, because Bloomsbury publish Harry Potter and Wisdom. And I thought, well, if they publish Harry Potter and Wisdom, I'm onto a good thing. But as an aside, they also published until his last book, Jonathan Sacks and the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I'm in some interesting company, Harry Potter and the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I was directed to a man called Robin Baird Smith. Now, when you go into publishers these days, or certainly when I walked in, I thought everybody there was a sixth former on work experience. It turns out that they weren't. It was just me being particularly old. But my publisher, Robin Baird Smith, was a man of my age. And he told me the book that I wanted to write. And he was right. I wasn't sure at first. Jackie was sure. He was sure. And I fell into line. And it's the best thing that anybody could ever have done for me, because Robin told me to write the book, 100,000 words. If I'd left to my own devices, it would have been 500,000, and been one of those books which ends up on library shelves and sells for £85 or even more, and nobody reads. Not many people will read this one, but at least it doesn't cost that amount of money. No, I'm putting myself down. And Robin said, "You're writing for the intelligent general reader, first and foremost Jewish, but by no means exclusively. You're writing for anybody who's interested in asking the questions that you're interested in asking." So that brings me back to your question about the Orthodox. It's written for the intelligent general reader, and there is no reason to suppose that there aren't as many intelligent general readers who are members of Orthodox communities, or who are members of Reform or liberal communities, or of no community at all. But the book does come with a health warning. I decided, I became very clear, I didn't want to write a polemical book. I didn't want to criticize or have fights with anybody. I'm not interested in that. But my starting point, and here, if you like, is the radicality and the here's the radicality. I've been very aware over many years of preaching that one needed to be careful not to upset people with what I would call traditional faith. And sometimes it was quite difficult one was taking a risk with saying things. And that's the great thing about a book, that one is not likely to offend in the same way. It so happens that traditional religion, not exclusively Judaism, but Judaism, talks about the fact that the righteous are rewarded and the wicked are punished. And I can't see that. That's not how the world is, as far as I'm concerned. It's particularly noticeable at this time of coronavirus, that coronavirus doesn't strike down only bad people. The second thing is that I don't actually believe in miracles in the conventional sense of the word miracle. In other words, that if you touch a sacred relic, you will be healed, or dare I say it, that you should take literally, I stress, an account which says one day's supply of oil in the temple lasted for 8 days. I don't believe that the Torah that we read on Shabbat morning and on other occasions as well, I don't believe V'zot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael, that that's the self-same book that Moses brought down from Sinai and laid before the children of Israel. I don't believe, like my teacher Louis Jacobs before, Alav HaShalom, or Zecher Tzadik Livracha, I don't believe, as Louis didn't believe, that the Torah came whistling through outer space and Moses acted as stenographer, and it was untouched by human hands and unaffected by a history of transmission. And above all, I don't believe that God intervenes in the sense of stretching out a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and reaching down and plucking children from a danger from an oncoming car, or heals people in the prime of their life from cancer, or could have rescued our people in the concentration camps, but chose not to, and chose to allow 6 million Jews to be murdered. So there I've said it.
Yeah.
I don't believe. So, just as so, I've written the book for people who may be as troubled as me about those things, and want to move on from that point and see whether anything of Judaism and God is left. And I think it is. Now, there must be Orthodox Jews who have the same theological problems, and they, I think, will enjoy reading it just as much as other people, because there's loads and loads of rabbinic literature in it. It's a real affirmation of rabbinic Judaism. Sorry.
So I got two questions, and you take whichever one of these you want to. One of them,
yes,
you just said rabbinic Judaism, but yet within the book yourself, you talk about some conclusions of rabbinic Judaism as being a mistake. You talk about the idea of mamzer being a mistake. That's pretty radical. That's a tough one to put in front of people. And then I want to put something on the other side. You've also just said, okay, so you talked about the God who you can't believe in some ways, or the aspects of God you can't believe in, but yet your book is full of passages referring to a very personal God. I know you call them yourself the Marmite passages, as if you can have this feeling of a personal dialogue with God in some way as part of your Judaism. So rabbinic Judaism with mistakes, and yet a God you can feel somehow in contact with. How do you balance that out?
Right. How long have we got? How long have I got left?
About 10 minutes.
Okay.
Good luck.
Then let me try and answer both
Then
questions.
questions from everybody, by the way.
Okay. Let's take the mamzer question first. What I say is that the word mamzer is taken by the rabbis of classical Judaism, and still today, to mean the child of an adulterous or incestuous union, and such a child is discriminated against in all sorts of ways. Now, we know from historical research, from the very context of the word in Deuteronomy, that that's not what mamzer means. And almost certainly what was going on was the sanctioning of the giving of some legitimacy by rabbinic Judaism, by those rabbis, to a pre-existing practice that was part of the DNA almost of Jewish life at that time. The rabbis, and maybe I'm wrong to use the word mistake. I don't think but the rabbis were capable and frequently did, and this is why they are so wonderful and fantastic. If they didn't like something in the Torah, if they thought that it was ethically wrong, if they thought it didn't serve its purpose in their times, they were prepared to turn the text of the Torah on its head in order to, they didn't actually say it's a mistake, but they corrected it. And you did get a great deal of correction going on in rabbinic Judaism until it ran out of steam. And I remember discussing this subject with a very eminent Orthodox colleague. And I said, how can you defend it being God's will that acts of parents result in the punishment of perfectly innocent children. It wasn't their fault that they were born out of adulterous or incestuous unions. To which my colleague replied, it may seem unjust to you, but its justice will be revealed in the fullness of time. Now, I just can't do that. And neither, I think, have Reform and Liberal Judaism been able to do it for many, many, many decades, because we don't discriminate against mamzerim. It's the possibility of self-criticism is absolutely essential for any religious tradition. And boy, do we have some things to be self-critical about? It's the first question. I don't know quite how the passages which are, as it were, good rabbinic phrase, my debate with God came about, but they're genuine in the sense that they reflect conversations that I've had with myself from time to time and over many years, when I am able to switch out of the service and switch on to listening to what's going on in my head. Now, it's mostly me. Mark said, you said to me the other day that your God sounds like a headmaster. Mm-hmm. To which I replied, my late father was a headmaster. My late wife was a head teacher. My daughter, my elder daughter, is the chair of governors of Akiva School. I can't escape it. Of course, how we conceive of God is 90% reflective of who we are, because we can't escape who we are, and why should we want to? But the important thing to recognize is that I think God is not merely a projection of such things, but in those conversations, there is a tiny space for something more than me. And because we live in uncertain times, and I elevate uncertainty to a religious principle, it's certainty that is the enemy of religion. Look how disfigured religion is, and other things as well, but look how disfigured religion has been by zealots who are absolutely certain, and look what they do in the name of their certainty. Uncertainty I raise to a religious principle, but I can't be sure. But I leave that up to you to see whether there's something authentic in it as far as you're concerned.
So something underneath all of this is where you learn from. You know, two questions. One of them is who, and this probably has to be the last ones until we open it up to everybody, who you learn from. Who do you learn from? And also, if you look at the references, the personal references, especially in your book, there's a very strong German connection. There's something going on there. So who do you learn from? Is it from that tradition specifically, and which bit of that tradition, or is it from something way broader than that? What's bringing you into this?
What is, first of all, I think we have to learn we have an enormously valuable tradition, the distilled wisdom of 3 millennia. It's not the only source of learning. It's not the best source, because I don't believe in one of the diseases of our age is ranking everything, which is the best pop song written in 1983 or something, which is the best religion. Rubbish. But Judaism is ours, and it's a very valuable tradition. So I want to learn from that, but we live in the context of the modern world, and there's a vast amount to be learnt from that modern world. Some of it we learn to be afraid of and to reject, because there's an awful lot that one can criticize. But actually, there's an awful lot that's good that I would actually classify as revelation. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, if you look through the list of people that I cite, it is astonishing, and it astonished me just how many of those people are Leo Beck College teachers or graduates, including my revered late colleague, Rabbi Michael Leigh. And I hope you'll permit me the time to hold up my treasured copy of Michael Leigh's book, Jewish Observance in the Home. It says that it was published by the Reform Synagogues of Great Britain, and the illustrations are by Gwen Leigh. And I don't know who Gwen Leigh is. Perhaps Sonia will enlighten me. And it was published in 1967. So so I've learned so much from the presence of my colleagues is everywhere. When I went to the Leo Beck College, the entire teaching staff were refugees from the Shoah. They were German Jews, of whom one was Rabbi Ignaz Maybaum, the founding rabbi of Edgware, then of Edgware Reform Synagogue. And my memories of going to his house for theology classes, and his wife, Frances, interrupting him by insisting on serving the boys proper continental coffee and pastries. Rabbi Maybaum has been with me all my life, a great influence on Rabbi Professor Nicky Delange, son of Edgware, emeritus professor of Jewish studies at Cambridge University, who produced an anthology of his book. And his other great student was Dov Mama, who is my rabbi. And I rebelled against all of that. But then in researching my family tree, found that my mother's maiden name was Mann. My mother, thankfully, is still with us. Her maiden name is Mann. And whenever I'm asked a question, when they're checking me through for security, what's your mother's name? Mann. I say, yes, my mother was a man before she was married, and they never laugh. But if I want to annoy my mother, I regale her with that story, and I know I shouldn't want to annoy my mother, but we won't go into my dysfunctional family. They were from the far-flung reaches of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they were definitely Jews of German origin. And I have discovered that my Yekka tendencies are now explicable, and my pedantic nature is entirely down to my German Jewish heritage. And seriously, and there is no time to explore this, but perhaps when you read the book, you'll find out why. It may well be that the German Liberale tradition, which has long been despised and rejected, is actually, despite everything, the best guide to the way we should be Reformed Jews, both ethically and theologically.
Thank you so much, Tony. So I think we should stop there, the formal part of tonight. What I'd love to do now is to ask if there are questions that people would like to share. So how are we going to do this? In a room, of course, we can wave our hands. Of course, those who are joining us on the live stream can't, I'm afraid, do so. But if you want to email me a question and you're on our live stream, all you need to do is to email rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk. That's rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk. What I'm going to suggest to everybody else is two possibilities. Either you can use the hands up function that is in the participants part of Zoom, and probably means you've used it before, or you can wave madly in the window where you are, and I'll try and see it, and then ask you to ask your question of Tony. So please, open to questions or anything else you might like to ask. Comments too are welcome. I'm looking for a kicker offer. Have we got one? Okay. Jeremy Leigh. Fantastic. Thank you, Jeremy. Please unmute yourself and ask away.
Okay, it should be unmuted. Is that okay?
You are.
Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Hello.
How good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you very much. So my question is, I work in education, as you know, and I haven't read the book, I confess, but I'm just thinking either about teaching, I'm thinking about any of the other people who are listening, whatever their backgrounds are, how does one teach about God? And that's a far too big a question, really, but given the fact that from what I gather, the book is largely about is this question of theology and I guess how we understand God, my instinct is to say that most people practice Judaism irrespective of God. God is an interesting support or play some other function in our lives, but actually what keeps us Jewish most of the time is something completely independent, whether it's a sense of culture or identity or solidarity, and the practices of being Jewish are much easier to teach than believing in an ethereal concept. So I wondered if you could maybe just sort of, given everything that you've said, it's not a critique of the book because I haven't read the book, but I suppose, does it matter if we manage to live our Jewish lives without belief and theology behind it?
Wow. Right. Let me first of all, let me say, Jeremy, that I was in contact with Jane Grabina earlier today, and she misses you terribly. And as far as God concepts come, you come pretty close to it as far as she is concerned. The second thing is, I can only, the second thing is, I can only reiterate that I think that I'm pretty I am hopeful about the continuity of the Jewish people and our survival, but I don't by any means think it's assured. And unless we really do address questions such as, what is the meaning and purpose of life? What are the values by which we should live and why? And when I mean values, I mean values that are rooted in Judaism and not general ethical values that are suddenly labeled, oh, that's Jewish because it's tikkun olam, or well, Judaism believes in environmental issues and the future of the world, but we don't actually make any contribution out of distinctively Jewish ideas and approaches. So that's so. And thirdly, I think that there really is a thirst for some response to the big issues, but we run away from it. We run away from it because we don't think there is any other reasonable, intellectually and experientially authentic approach other than the defense offered by fundamentalists who actually, well, I don't think they do justice to the richness and depth and ability to wrestle and agonize of Judaism. And finally, let me say that I am currently working with a colleague of mine, Neil James, who is not only a better rabbinic scholar than I am, but is also a absolutely up-to-date educationalist on a series of 5 teaching sessions just on Torah and the concept of Torah, which we're starting on Erev Shavuot for 3 congregations, and we'll then go on, should I not have put everybody off after the first session, for 4 more sessions. And I don't know that I have the koyach or anybody could stand it, but I think one could apply Neil's methodology, which he applies to 1 chapter of the book, the chapter 5 on Torah, to all 10 chapters. I don't know what that would do with God, but it's not ethereal. It's not ethereal. I latch on very much to the ancient Jewish tradition of challenging and arguing with God, which goes back to Abraham and the arguments over Sodom and Gomorrah, and runs right the way through history. And that's what Jews do. That's what we do. We don't avoid the big issues and retreat into schmaltz. We wrestle and we challenge. And when I say schmaltz,
are you Eric?
Pardon?
No, I'm not.
No, well, that's somebody who's unmuted their microphone.
Oh, right. When I talk about schmaltz, I'm not at all talking about the tours and the fantastic educational work. And this is not schmooze that you do, but it's a very good way in, because it takes people out of themselves and gives them that sense of being part of an unbreakable chain with it, that we don't exist merely by ourselves. Where we come from is integral to who we are. And that's the perfect way of saying, well, if that's who we are, what's the meaning to being who we are?
Thank you, Tony. Now we have about 10 minutes left altogether. Penny Kay wanted to ask a question. So Penny, if you could now unmute your microphone, please, and speak up so that we can hear you.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Hi, Rabbi. I'm Penny. Can you hear me?
We can.
Not only can I hear you, I can see you, which is much better.
So I put my video on. So I'm from Sheffield. So thanks for all the little jokes about Sheffield. So you started off by saying the problem that we often face with the accusation of Judaism light, Reform Judaism. So how do you respond to that in a brief way with someone who hasn't got the time to go into lots of theology? How do you respond to the Judaism light in a quick way?
I don't think there is any quick way of responding to Judaism light. We have to provide ways for Jews to read and to study and to think seriously about their Judaism. And the wonderful thing that we have been forced to discover about modern technique is these modern techniques work. And there is no reason whatsoever why people in Sheffield should not be able to study in the same way as people in Edgware. And in fact, I would be pretty sure that this has brought more people to this session, the various ways of accessing it, than if everybody had, if you'll pardon me, had to schlep, particularly on a cold, wet, dark evening, to any synagogue. We must learn from this. And now, how you do a Jewish journey remotely, that's really a challenge to Jeremy. But we now have all the tools at our hands for serious, and by serious I don't mean uncomfortable, painful, lacking in humor, boring, but we can get down. The whole essence of Judaism lies in what the rabbis did. It's unique. They sat down and they discussed and they interrogated texts. They interrogated the Torah. They raised all sorts of issues. They discussed, they debated, they often disagreed, which suits Jews down to the ground. But that's the essence of Judaism. The essence of Judaism is about interrogating our texts, not just the Torah, but all Jewish texts, ancient and modern, by interrogating, discussing, debating, thinking, disagreeing, all of those things. That's the heart of Judaism. And these sort of techniques enable us to do it, because nobody then should have trouble finding a teacher and a group to study with.
Thank you very much, Tony. So again, I'd love to just go for a round. Anybody who has a question, please either use the hands up feature in Zoom, which is under participant, and you'll find it says hands, or put your hand up just like John Moritz has. So John, and anybody else who is on the live stream who might like to send one, just use rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk. So John, can I bring you forwards now to ask your question? I'll just unmute you. Oh, or can you unmute yourself? You've done it. Fantastic. Let me bring you forward.
Rabbi Bayfield, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Are you a Cardiff Moritz?
No, well, he was my uncle, but I'm the Manchester one.
Ah, right.
Okay. And I have read the book. Indeed, enjoyed it very much. And I actually just wanted to comment on a bit you made, or a part of what you said, which related to whether this would appeal to people outside Reform Judaism. I have a very good friend of many years who is quite a prominent Orthodox member in North Manchester, but who also is he's well known here as being a very good forward thinker. And he'd read your book, indeed he read it twice, and we had a very spirited debate about many of the arguments you put forward. So I just thought you should know that I've actually seen firsthand what you were hoping may happen has happened. And it gave me heart that it isn't just something that's going to appeal to people who are members of Reformed schools.
Oh, well, it was worth coming just for that. Thank you very much. And I think the publisher might have hoped that it would sell even more copies than it has, though it's pretty much sold out. Its first hardback run, but then you don't publish so many hardbacks these days. But what has been wonderful has been the individual responses that I've received. I've received responses from people, some of them Christian theologian friends, who've been really touched by it. A long-standing dialogue partner of mine, Reverend Alan Race, who's now up in Leicester, Alan said to me yesterday, he emailed me yesterday, telling me that a review was about to come out, but saying, if you don't mind me saying so, the writing the book has made you more Jewish. And I think that's true. I've spent a lot of time discovering the brilliance, the radicality, and the excitement of early rabbinic thought, and realizing that we are as much part of that and as much heirs to it as anybody else. And I've come to feel that I and we are part of the mainstream of rabbinic tradition, and that those early teachers would be really pleased to discover that we were asking the same difficult, painful, challenging questions that they did.
Thank you, Tony. So I think we have time. Thank you, Tony. I think we have time for one final question before we need to go to our end. And David Lewin, I can see your question. So can I unmute you? And please, I'll bring you forwards. By the way, just while I'm doing that, just to say to you that although Tony said to Jeremy, how do you do Jewish journeys at a time like this? I ought to just say, because Jeremy was our online talk of the week at EHRS a few weeks ago, he said he's trying to work out a way of you being able to virtually tour the Jewish world. So watch out for Jeremy's future offerings.
Brilliant.
So David, and I can see Sylvia as well, but I don't know which of you is asking. It's probably David.
I'm about to. Rabbi Hillel said, if I don't do things for myself, who am I? If not now, when? And if I'm only for myself, who am I? Or in Hebrew, im ein ani li mili. Are you not deviating largely from what Hillel decided was the essence of Judaism?
No. Explain to me why you think I am, David.
Because Hillel basically starts with, if I don't do things for myself, and there's not really going to, he uses it totally, to me, the words sound a totally different essence to the one that you've described. I don't disagree with either. I don't want to say that one is better than the other, but to me they sound totally different.
I think if you read the book, you'll find just what a prominent place Hillel and Beit Hillel play in the book. And there is a awe-inspiring text, arguably the most radical text in the whole of classical rabbinic Judaism, from Beit Hillel, about Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, about two conflicting truths, both being the word of God, which is almost mind-blowing, profoundly theological, and I think that in some ways is the essence of the book. Though having resisted the RSGB's attempt, or the Reform Movement's attempt, to get me to sum up Judaism in 250 words, I'm certainly not going to be as foolhardy as to try and sum it up in one sentence. And of course, dear old Rabbi Simlai, who did just that as a homiletic exercise, put his foot in it, because the literalists took it literally, not they took it halachically, not homiletically, and that's how we ended up with this concept of Tariag of 613 mitzvot. But Simlai was an Aggadist, and so am I, and so I think are you. And how are you, Sylvia? Are you well?
You can't hear us. We've been muted. We've been unmuted.
I can hear you.
We're fine, thank you. Very well indeed.
And the children?
Everybody's well, thank goodness. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Thank
Lovely
you.
to see you.
So we now need to come to an end, as we're ending at 9 o'clock. And I'm just going to share again a picture of Tony's book, so that you can see it. It's available from Amazon and various other good booksellers, wherever you can find yourself and get yourself out to. And also you can find links to it on the EHRS website, so that you can go straight there if you would like to. What I'm now going to do is to bring Keith Price forwards, and Keith is going to give the vote of thanks on behalf of Edgware and Hendon Reform Synagogue to Tony for being our Rabbi Michael Leigh lecturer of this year. And I'm sitting virtually in the Rabbi Michael Leigh Beit Midrash, by the way, which is at our shul, which now sports many of the windows from Dainscroft, from Hendon. In fact, all the windows which portray the biblical festivals. And here we are in between Hag HaMatzot and Hag Shavuot, between Pesach and Shavuot, We're at position 33, just about there. There we go. So let me now bring Keith forwards. And where is he? Now comes the challenge of finding him. Where's he gone? I know he's there somewhere. There he is. Right. Keith, let me bring you forwards to give our vote of thanks.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Rabbi Professor Tony Bayfield. The titles are all extremely deserved and valued. But given our long association over many years through Reform Judaism, and indeed your presence so many times at Edgware and District Reform Synagogue as it was, please allow me to address you as Tony. The lecture has been continuing for many, many years in honor of Michael. This is a joint effort with, of course, the Yitzhak Rabin B'nai B'rith Lodge, of which Michael was its founding president, and of which he was an active and committed member. And of course, as rabbi of Edgware and District Reform Synagogues as it was for 30 years, he was such a part of our history, a part that can never, ever be forgotten. We are honored, Tony, that you are here with us tonight because of your close association with Edgware, particularly, your close association with Michael. And of course, by coming here today, not only are we honored, but I would suggest that you also honor Michael in very much in all that he did for Edgware. And I know that the thanks that I'm about to make are not only on behalf of organizations, but of course of all members, and in particular, Michael's family, who are watching tonight, to Sonia, to Marion, his sister, and of course, his children, Andrew, Jeremy, and Sarah, all of whom, in their own way, were and are a vital part of the history of Edgware Reform Synagogue. Now you know that Michael was very much on the traditional wing of Reform Judaism, very much influenced perhaps by Rabbi Dr. Werner van der Zyl, when Michael was a youth leader in Aleph, and then when he was an assistant minister at West London Synagogue, Rabbi van der Zyl was there. And he brought that traditional style to Edgware when he joined in 1963. And as you know, Tony, over 30 years, there was so much that Michael brought to our synagogue. He created a traditional feel, which in some ways was almost radical in its own way by comparison with Reform Judaism at that time, but had been adopted by Reform Judaism throughout in latter years. And I'm thinking particularly of the way that he brought to the community a second day Rosh Hashanah, how he brought to the community a Tikkun Leil for Erev Shavuot. And like yourself, though perhaps not as prolific, Michael was a writer, as you point out. His book, Jewish Observance in the Home, which incidentally can also be found on Amazon today, was very much part and parcel of his belief in bringing to his members that greater practical study and observance of Judaism. And his other objective, clearly, was to develop his synagogue into a body that would have concern for its members and the Jewish community and the practice of Judaism particularly. Now, you mentioned that you hope to offer what is called substance. That's the word you used. Substance for Reform Judaism through thought. And also, you reversed that trilogy by putting identity first and Judaism and then God. And I would venture to suggest that Michael did very much the same. He encouraged members of the Edgware Reformed Synagogue, from the initial 800 members when he first came, through to 2,500 families when he retired. And his aim was certainly to bring the individual into the community, to value the individual, and through the individual, through the practices that he firmly believed in and advocated, that Judaism would be intrinsically embodied in each member. And from there, it would be hoped that thought, God, and theology may follow in all different forms for all different members. So, Tony, your book and the way you have presented it to us tonight is all part and parcel, I would suggest, as a layperson, of the tradition, particularly of Edgware. You refer to your book, as indeed your publisher did, for the intelligent general reader. Some of us are very loath to think of ourselves as intelligent. But nevertheless, from reading your book, perhaps we can realize that we are all intelligent in some way or another, that can understand in the unique manner that you are able to teach us what it does mean to be Jewish today and to confront the real issues which are changing. Those issues will change, I'm sure. But with your book and your words tonight, we may be able to take comfort, to understand, and to make a little more sense of the world around us in our Jewish environment. So, Tony, on behalf of all who have been watching you tonight, sincerely, thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Tony. Thank you, Keith. So we've now come to the end of this evening, the Rabbi Michael Leigh Memorial Lecture. Just to let anybody know who's here that there's a lot of online talks that we do through Edgware and Hendon Reformed Synagogue. Everybody's welcome to attend. All you need to do is have a look at our front page of our website, and we'll always tell you what we've got on each week. And we've had various talks over the weeks and voices across the continents, including this week with Rabbi Eli Friedman in Rodef Shalom in Philadelphia, in dialogue with our Rabbi Debbie Young-Summers. Much happening. It's really lovely that you've come to join us tonight. Tony, thank you from me as well. And I'm quite sure from all of us, I'm going to open up so we can all see each other. And if we want to do things in the traditional way, unmute your microphones and let's give Tony the round of applause that he just...
Thank you.
And good
Thank
night
you
to you
so
all.
much.
Hope to see you all soon in various different ways.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Tony.
Bye.
Tony. Bye, Wendy.
Bye-bye. Yes.
Thank you.
Very, very clever. He really is true.
He disappeared.
Leave. Oh, there we go. They've got themselves.
To be able to absorb all of that,
Sheila? Bye, Sheila.
Bye. Think about what he said.
Oh, hi, Sheila. Hi, Sheila. Hello and goodbye.
David Cohen was explaining what it is to be Jewish.
I've got the camera pointing. Okay. Leave. Leave.
Try and understand the meaning of Judaism. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is we have such a wide variety of different ways of believing ourselves as Jewish.